So we're going to wait another 5 minutes. Let me get through the dining hall line. We'll start in about 5 minutes or so. So please keep waiting. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming to Professors for Lunch. It's my pleasure to welcome you. My name is Philip Munoz. I teach in the Political Science Department at the Law School. And I also direct Notre Dame's new minor in Constitutional Studies. Constitutional Studies minor, as well as the Office of Undergraduate Studies, is pleased to sponsor today's event. I'd like to start with some thank yous and to recognize a few guests. The Constitutional Studies minor is named in recognition and in memory of David Potenziani. David lived in Alumni Hall. He graduated from Notre Dame in 2001. Tragically, he passed away in 2007. He graduated before I arrived at Notre Dame, so I did not have the privilege of teaching him. But I'm told by his family that he loved his classes in constitutional law. And so in memory of their son, the Potenziani family generously gave the gift that allowed us to start the Constitutional Studies minor. And we have a representative of the family, Fred Botek, a 1989 graduate. So thank you, Fred, for all your support. And hopefully Greg Potenziani, David's brother, will be here later on this afternoon. A few other thank yous. Joanne Delaneva, the whole crew from the Office of Undergraduate Studies, Joe and Ava, they've been tremendously supportive of our efforts. So thank you again for all that you have done. A few other friends, John and Betty Snyder, friends of the program, are here, so thank you very much. I'd like to recognize Dean Kilpatrick, who's always a big supporter of the program. And then the Dean's Fellows, you know who you are. Thank you very much for your support. Jennifer Smith, my assistant, is working as usual. Will you please join me in giving Jennifer a hand? Jennifer really does all the work for these events, so thank you, Jennifer. And if any of the undergraduates here are interested in the Constitutional Studies minor, we've just started enrolling students, so you can talk to me or you can talk to Jennifer, and we can tell you more about the program and enroll you if you're so interested. I'm sure everyone in the room knows that this past March, Notre Dame filed a federal lawsuit against the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Kathleen Sebelius. And Notre Dame contends that the Obamacare contraception mandate violates both federal law and the First Amendment. Our conversation for today asks two questions about this lawsuit. First of all, why is Notre Dame suing the Obama administration, and should it be doing so? I've asked some of Notre Dame's most distinguished faculty to help start our conversation with some brief comments. And I'm going to call to the podium Lizzie Helpling, a junior here at Notre Dame, our first Constitutional Studies minor, to introduce our faculty panel. So please join me in welcoming Lizzie and welcoming our panel.
And can we also give a warm round of applause to Professor Munoz, without who this event would never take place. As Professor Munoz said, my name is Lizzie Helpling. I'm a junior economics major with minors in the Constitutional Studies program and also in philosophy, politics, and economics. On behalf of the Tocqueville program, the Office of Undergraduate Studies, and the Dean's Fellows, I'd like to thank you for coming to our panel today, which is entitled Professors for Lunch: Why Notre Dame is suing the Obama administration to protect religious freedom, and should it be doing so? I would now like to welcome our faculty panel. Professor Ann Astell is a professor of theology, focusing on medieval literature and spirituality. She's an accomplished author and editor, and currently serves as president of the International Colloquium on Violence and Religion, and is president of the Society for the Study of Christian Spirituality. Professor Gerry Bradley teaches at the Notre Dame Law School, serving as the director of Notre Dame's Natural Law Institute and the president of the Fellowship of Catholic Scholars. His work focuses mainly on religion and constitutional issues, and currently teaches a trial advocacy program. Dr. Mary Rose DeAngelos is an associate professor of theology, focusing on biblical studies and Judaism and Christianity in antiquity. She received her PhD from Yale University and is primarily interested in the study of gender and ancient religion. And Dr. Mark Noll is the Francis A. McNamara Professor of History, holding a PhD from Vanderbilt University. His work centers on the history of Christianity in the United States and Canada, and its development alongside American culture. In 2006, he received the National Endowment for the Humanities Medal and is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our panelists.
I guess I'm up first. As my contribution to the discussion today, I want to argue that the supposed good to be gained by giving American women free contraceptives as preventive health care through precisely this coercive means, the means prescribed by the HHS mandate, when other means are available to attain that end, has to be weighed against the tremendous cost to the United States and to the world of the loss of religious liberty that has flourished historically here in this country. In order to grasp what religious liberty means to U.S. citizens, one needs a long and broad view of religious practice in this country, as well as a side glance at religious freedom as it exists in other countries. Let me begin with a story. Anticipating his own possible assassination, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. instructed his aides to take him to a Catholic hospital should anything bad happen to him. On April 4th, 1968, something did happen. His aides remembered his request. Driving past another hospital, they rushed Dr. King, mortally wounded, in an ambulance to St. Joseph's Hospital in Memphis, where he died. Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration were among those who cared for him in his final hour. This same order of sisters, which administers many hospitals and schools in the United States, and which has one of its central houses right here in Mishawaka, is among the litigants who, together with the University of Notre Dame, have brought a lawsuit against the Obama administration in opposition to the HHS mandate. The story makes us pause. Why did Reverend King, a Baptist minister, ask specifically to be taken to a Catholic hospital? Perhaps he had been moved by the witness of the many Catholic laymen, nuns, and priests, including University of Notre Dame's president, Father Theodore Hesper, who stood with him in the protest line. Perhaps due to his family's previous positive experiences at a Catholic hospital, for example, when his second daughter was born. Perhaps out of a desire to be cared for at a place where religious faith, comparable to his own, moved people to attend to the physical and spiritual needs of others. What is certain is that Dr. King felt strongly that a Catholic hospital was different from a public hospital. That difference mattered to him, mattered a lot. It should matter to us. Since the beginning of our country, people have expressed their religious beliefs in public service to the common good. Who can measure the benefit to the citizens of the United States that have come, for example, from Catholic hospitals, schools, colleges, and charitable services? Similar blessings have issued from the many other religious organizations, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Orthodox, Muslim, whose members have united in the service of mankind out of religious motives and as an expression of their religious identity. Part of the distinctiveness of the United States has been precisely its strong protection under law throughout the 220 years of its history of this religious liberty. The cost to the United States if the religious apostolates, so vital to civil society and its present plurality and religious diversity, are undermined or destroyed by the HHS mandate is incalculably great. No supposed health care benefit, especially one that is readily available through other means, can possibly outweigh the resulting loss to our society or justify this unprecedented assault upon religious liberty, this affront to our constitutional freedoms. To force religious organizations to function contrary to their religious beliefs would be to rob them of their fundamental character as religious. In a remarkable series of exchanges in 2004 between the then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger and philosophy professor Marcello Pera, former president of the Italian Senate, the future Pope offered his words in appreciation of religious liberty in the United States. Although a principle of separation between church and state obtains in both Europe and the U.S., that separation functions differently, Ratzinger explains, for historical reasons. In France, notably, the modern secular state arose in opposition to religion, and to this day, the laical system there prohibits the teaching of religious subject matters in the public schools and the wearing there of visible religious signs. In the United States, by contrast, the separation of church and state came about specifically as a protection for its citizens who had come to America from countries like England, where there was a state church, and where religious minorities, Puritans, Anabaptists, Catholics, were barred from full participation in civil life because of their nonconformity, and subject also to persecution. Therefore, the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights guarantees the free exercise of religion, while also prohibiting the establishment of a state religion. In Ratzinger's words, the foundations of American society were laid by the free churches, which by the tenets of their creed and by their very structure were not a state church, but rather a free association of individuals. In this sense, you could say that American society is built on a positively conceived separation of church and state that is determined and demanded by religion. In America, the state is little more, says Ratzinger, than a free space for different religious communities to congregate. It is in its nature to recognize and permit these communities to exist in their particularity and their non-membership in the state. Similarly, Ratzinger contends, the private sphere in America has an absolutely public character. Non-governmental entities are not excluded in any way, style, or form from the public dimension of social life. The fabric of American civic life is colorfully full of a great array of churches, interest groups, privately established schools, universities, hospitals, charities, all of which contribute to the public good in accordance with their own ideals, religious beliefs, and sense of mission. In his letter to Marcello Pera, Ratzinger observes, quote, the legal and tax system favors and enables this kind of non-governmental culture in America, in contrast to Europe, unquote. What the HHS mandate would abolish is precisely this long-honored governmental support for a non-governmental culture, where religious freedom is exercised in public life, in works of charity, not just in houses of worship at set times on certain days. In the case of Notre Dame, we are dealing with a Catholic university founded and administered by a religious congregation, the Congregation of Holy Cross. The university serves Catholics and non-Catholics, Christians and non-Christians, but as a Catholic apostolate in the service of Christ and Christ's Church. The Catechism of the Catholic Church officially teaches that human life is sacred, that abortion and contraception are intrinsically evil. An official teaching of the Church cannot be publicly disregarded by an institution that calls itself Catholic. When Father Jenkins wrote last May to announce that the University of Notre Dame had filed a lawsuit against the federal government, he said in clear and uncertain terms, and I quote, this filing is about the freedom of a religious organization to live its mission, and its significance goes well beyond any debate about contraceptives. For if we concede that the government can decide which religious organizations are sufficiently religious to be awarded the freedom to follow the principles that define their mission, then we have begun to walk down a path that ultimately leads to the undermining of those institutions. For if one presidential administration can override our religious purpose and use religious organizations to advance policies that undercut our values, then surely another administration will do the same for another, very different set of policies, each time invoking some concept of popular will or the public good, with the result of these religious organizations become mere tools for the exercise of government power, morally subservient to the state and not free from this infringement. If that happens, it will be the end of genuinely religious organizations in all but name, unquote. When the university filed its lawsuit, it acted courageously and prophetically, not just on its own behalf, but also on behalf of many other religiously minded persons and organizations whose religious liberty is threatened directly or indirectly by the HHS mandate and what it represents. Should it have done so? In my view, the answer is a resounding yes. As the history of Notre Dame shows, to the extent that the university has carried out its distinctively Catholic mission, it has served God and country. In filing its lawsuit, the university has acted prophetically and patriotically. If Notre Dame cannot be Catholic in the United States of America, it cannot be Notre Dame, and America can't be America. That's my remark.
Okay, I'm going to change, I'm going to begin with, is this okay? Is this working? Okay. I'm going to begin with two reminders. One is that I'm speaking here as a well-informed Catholic rather than as an ethicist, though I have my sources and they were very helpful. And secondly, I'm going to remind us all that only a tiny minority of Catholic dioceses and universities and institutions in general have joined this lawsuit. And so I thought I'm going to change our question for my presentation. And my question is, why do other Catholic dioceses and colleges and the CHA and other institutions like that feel free not to join this suit? I'm going to lay out, there are undoubtedly practical answers to that, and I haven't asked them, but I'm going to lay out three among many principles of religious, Roman Catholic theological thinking that may lie behind the majority decision not to sue. The first is from moral theology and is called material cooperation with evil. The second, the basis of all Catholic moral teaching, is the primacy of conscience. And the third comes more or less from the realm of doctrinal theology and is called perception. The first approach is for those who accept the idea that the use of artificial contraception is a moral evil. This first approach looks at the mandate in light of the many compromises we make in order to live in a complex social and economic world. Most, if not all of us, are to some degree involved in and contributors to actions we find morally repugnant. Insofar as we subject them to moral thinking, we do this on the basis of judging the degree of responsibility with which we participate in them. Catholic ethics addresses this by distinguishing between formal and material cooperation with evil, and further distinguishing immediate and mediate or remote cooperation. The contrast, formal and material, derives from late scholastic theology, and those terms mean almost the opposite of their popular meaning. In popular American English, a formal agreement means surface, not heartfelt. And saying something is material to a case means it's relevant, it's really important. Okay, so we're going the other direction here. In technical language, formal cooperation with evil means to consent with and seek the end judged evil. Okay? Material cooperation with evil occurs when the person seeks a larger good, a different end, rejecting one or more results of the action that's leans toward it as evil, and so not intending the evil, not consenting to the evil, but rather proceeding with the good for the sake of the good that is will. This is actually something that we do all the time on more or less conscious or multiple levels, great and small. So for at least some college and university professors, hospital administrators, bishops, wards, the institutional goal that they're pursuing is providing adequate compensation to their employees by means of a package of salary and benefits. Among the many provisions prescribed by the Affordable Care Act are several well-woman benefits, 7 well-woman benefits, one of which is free access to contraception. The Act moves paying for birth control from one part of the pay package, that is, from one salary, to another, to the package of benefits. The role of the institution, even the self-insured institution, is quite limited. Institutional cooperation in the use of contraceptions changes minimally. That is, they pay you your salary, you pay for birth control with it. This will now become, they pay you benefits, you pay for birth control with it. You get birth control with it. It will still be immediate or remote from the action itself, from the action of using birth control. This analysis, it's complicated and very technical one, there's lots of other ramifications, but it's very important for those who genuinely believe that contraception is a moral evil. And it is almost certainly in the minds of some Catholic administrators, like there are Jesuits out there, right? But this is far from the case for all Catholics. I myself could not invoke material cooperation with evil if I were in the position of making this decision, because I do not believe that contraception is evil. Like many, and indeed most Catholics, believe that taking responsibility for planning one's family is both a moral imperative for the person and a social good for the community, and that what the Vatican has deemed artificial contraception is the most responsible and effective means to that end. Catholics who believe this are compelled by conscience when they use, support, or promote contraception. For instance, when Carolyn Kennedy addressed the DNC, she made it explicit that it is as a Catholic woman that she supports reproductive rights, including the mandate. That is, her conscience, formed by the RSCJs at the 91st Street Convent, tells her that every woman is bound by commitments to her spiritual and intellectual vocation, to her spouse and children, and her larger family, and to the common good through all of those, including the political good of the US and the world, especially the developing world. And that those commitments are best served by the availability and use of contraceptives. Where there is a conflict between any woman's conscience in these matters and the official church position, her conscience takes precedence. Similarly, Melinda Gates' research has convinced her that providing contraception is one among many initiatives that are essential to increasing the quality and duration of life for women and men in the developing world. Many Catholics working in Catholic institutions, and at least some Catholic university and college presidents and hospital CEOs and on, similarly consider family planning and contraception a moral imperative and a social good, and support the HHS mandate quietly but without difficulty. A third principle that enables Catholics like Kennedy, Gates, and me to take this position comes from doctrinal theology. That rubric is reception. It is not enough for doctrines to be promoted by councils, popes, or bishops. They must also be received by the faithful to be settled teaching. It's frequently been noted that some 80% of American Catholics explicitly disagree with the ban on contraception, and 98% of Roman Catholic women have used, American Roman Catholic women have used birth control. These statistics are often dismissed on the grounds that we don't produce the doctrine by poll. But while the statistics themselves are not definitive, the reality behind them is highly significant. The massive rejection of the ban by faithful Catholics calls into question its status as doctrine. It is far from clear that the supposed immorality of so-called artificial contraception should be regarded as settled teaching. The late Cardinal Martini, an New Testament scholar like myself, and the Archbishop of the ancient Diocese of Milan, recently warned that the Church, actually the Vatican, is 200 years out of date, particularly in issues of sex and gender. I myself would be more inclined to say it is more like 100 years. This is serious. Most of the 100th anniversaries of women's suffrage are rolling up over the next 20 years. The US is 1920, the others, and they kind of fall around that. Not all the fear and hostility with which the Church greeted them has yet dissipated. Among the doctors who developed the first reliable oral contraception in the US in the middle of the 20th century was one Catholic who pursued his work as a Catholic because he saw the pill as a way to work with nature. He saw it as natural. Only since 1965 has birth control been legal in all states. My parents couldn't legally get birth control when I was a freshman in college. Rome is notorious for the molasses-like tempo at which it works. Of course, I hope that Cardinal Martini's 200-year projection was wrong. But in the meantime, most Catholics will and must continue to follow the dictates of their consciences.
Well, thank you, Philip, and all the others for organizing this event. It's not the first time I've spoken about the mandate, and in 30 years of law teaching, I've been to a lot of convocations. But I think it's the first time that I've actually been advertised by the proprietors of the event as being available for a lunch. Ann Astell had a very good line when we were sitting up to the side earlier. She noted how among her colleagues, the cannibalistic overtones of this occasion had not been missed. But Philip put the question, or the two questions that I heard him put earlier were, why did Notre Dame sue, and should it have sued? Well, as the first, probably best, at least it's the most reliable way to go, to let Notre Dame speak for itself. And if you should troll on the internet and come up with a copy of Notre Dame's complaint, filed on May 21st, I think, you'll discover that the money line in this particular regard is that Notre Dame seeks to get out from under a legally imposed burden, although its effect is prospective. It's not an effect yet, but the prospective effect will be to impose the burden of moral impossibility. Notre Dame says that it'll be faced with a true dilemma. It can't, in conscience, comply with a legal directive, which, in Notre Dame's language, would require it to provide, pay for, and/or facilitate access and provision of moral evils. On the other hand, the alternative would be to violate its conscience vis-a-vis benefits to its employees by discontinuing health care and paying substantial penalties, which I think at this prosperous university would not be quite ruinous, but for most of the other institutions who come under the same burden, the financial penalties of not complying would be truly ruinous. So perhaps that speaks for itself, that when it's placed under a burden of this sort, anyone would seek to get out from under it. And Notre Dame has done so. It's not just a matter of contraception, right? I mean, the legal term, to be sure, is FDA-approved methods of contraception. But Notre Dame rightly points out in its lawsuit what anybody can see and what maybe most people have remarked upon, which is that it's also about abortion. Included among the FDA-approved methods of so-called contraception are Plan B, the morning after pill, whose workings I think are a bit mysterious, and I'm not myself sure that it works often or even at all as an abortifacient. But the week after pill, so-called Ella, certainly works at least sometimes as an abortifacient, as does the IUD. The more common, inoculant pill, maybe the most common chemical cocktails in the pill are a little bit low on the estrogen, which surely suppresses ovulation and therefore is a contraceptive, properly understood. But it looks like the most popular forms of the pill also work, at least at times, by causing abortions. So these things come as a package. It's not as if Notre Dame or Wheaton College or anybody else can say, well, we're willing to tolerate or go along with, in some sense, the true contraception, two contraceptives, but not the abortion-causing pills. They come as a package. So Notre Dame's choice is really to go along, pay for, provide, or facilitate access to abortion, or not. Now, Notre Dame rightly is steering clear of doing that, and indeed, if push came to shove, I think would have to avoid doing that above all else. And it's not just a matter, I think, of formal and material cooperation. Or to put it differently, it's material cooperation which includes the following, I think, essential fact: that Notre Dame is not a business, it's not an individual, and it's not a union or a neighborhood association. It's a Catholic institution. So that among its responsibilities as a Catholic institution is not only affording formal cooperation and certain kinds of material cooperation, but is to bear clear and transparent and perspicuous witness to the moral truth. You might say Notre Dame's responsibilities as a Catholic institution are higher on the chain of moral responsibilities, or a higher grade or value of moral responsibilities than even, for example, a Catholic business. And I think it's especially significant that Notre Dame chose to sue, because it is the leading Catholic university in the country, if not the world. And it, frankly, in light of its not only honoring of Obama, if you will, in 2009, but its conspicuous public attempts to work out some kind of political arrangement with the Obama administration, which efforts were in good faith and failed. That I think for Notre Dame to sue is an especially important signal, or a witness, if you will, to what's going on with the mandate, that it has special significance in our society. And two more things about why it should have sued. Ann referred to one, and it has to do with the prevalence of Catholic institutions, Catholic healthcare apostolates, social service apostolates, educational institutions in our society. They play a significant, if not irreplaceable, role in our civil society for the benefit of many people, Catholic and non, and maybe especially non-Catholics when it comes to social services and hospitals. Martin Luther King, last time I looked, was not a Catholic when he passed away, and was seeking a Catholic hospital for his treatment. But I think that here, if you look at the Cardinals column for February 26th in the Catholic newspaper in Chicago, the Archdiocesan newspaper in Chicago. I'm going to paraphrase what Cardinal George wrote in February of 2012. He invited the readers of the Catholic newspaper to purchase a copy of the Archdiocesan Directory as a souvenir. And he further advised them to look on page L3, because there, he told his readers, you'll see a list of all the Catholic hospitals in Lake and Cook counties. And if you wait 2 years from now and buy that same directory, that page will be blank. Now, this is not Chicken Little screaming that the sky is falling. It's not a bluff. It's not even a threat, meaning if you do this bad thing, I will choose to do something else that's a kind of retaliation. It's simply a warning that the Catholic institutions put in a position of moral impossibility. There can be no alternative to avoiding complicity in evil, contraception, abortion, and suffering the evil consequences. Of that there can be, I think, little doubt. So the potential loss to American society is great, as Ann Astell so ably described. The second reason is this. I mean, leaving aside for the moment anything else you think you know about the Obama administration's understanding of religious liberty, whether you've taken that from a case called Lozano Tabor, decided by the Supreme Court in February, or its treatment of the U.S. Catholic Conference or Catholic Relief Services in other contexts. But just looking at this case, this body of law, these lawsuits, Notre Dame is one of about 23 or 24 lawsuits. In this body of law, there are two very alarming definitions, if you will, or understandings of religious liberty. Now, religious liberty, I think, it should be understood as a critical component of the common good. Everybody has a horse in this race. And though it sounds a bit odd or paradoxical to say this notion or this set of assertions or propositions is a common resource, because we think of resources as lakes or highways or manhole, sewer systems. But actually, religious liberty is a common good. And in this case, there are at least the following two striking and I think very unfortunate definitions or components of religious liberty as the administration articulates it in court. One, with regard to lawsuits filed by not quite religious employers like Notre Dame or even Catholic institutions as such, but with regard to lawsuits filed by businesses. There are several of these. Ann mentioned earlier that Hobby Lobby has just recently sued, which I hadn't heard before. But there are at least 2 lawsuits pending by Catholic businesses, by Frank O'Brien in St. Louis and the Newland family in Denver. Now in Denver, Hercules Industries is their company. And in that lawsuit, where the plaintiffs are Catholic business people, have secured a preliminary injunction against the mandate because their legal case against it looks promising enough to that judge. And in fact, I think that's the way the lawsuits eventually will go. That under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, not necessarily the First Amendment itself, I think Notre Dame and the other plaintiffs have a very, very strong case. But the Obama administration in the Denver case involving Hercules Industries observed of this conceitedly Catholic-run business, run according to the principles of Catholic teachings of social justice. The administration said, well, if you're a secular business, you simply do not engage in the exercise of religion. Full stop. You simply do not. So the exercise of religion is removed as a possible way of acting if you're in what the administration called a secular business. 2, the so-called exemption. That is to say, not every religious employer is required to satisfy the requirements of the mandate. Some are exempted. Now, no doubt Notre Dame is not within this class of exempt institutions, religious employers. But this is a remarkably narrow understanding of religious employer, which would apply to a diocese itself and probably no other institution that I can think of. That is the church, the sacristy, headquarters. I don't think it would even apply to a Catholic grade school, and it certainly wouldn't apply to any other Catholic institution I can think of. Now, the reasons why are multiple, and it's most often observed that while Notre Dame wouldn't qualify, or Catholic Charities wouldn't qualify, or Catholic Hospital wouldn't qualify, because, contrary to the requirements of this exemption, those places either serve a clientele that's not primarily Catholic, which is certainly the case with social services or hospitals, or most of its employees are not necessarily Catholic, which is true of many of these places as well. But the one criterion that's not often remarked upon is the first, which is the following. The purpose, not the primary purpose, the purpose of the institution must be, quote, inculcation of religious values, close quote. Now this further indicates or confirms that the whole push behind this exemption is to treat those things as religion that happen within the four walls of the church building itself, and that's it. Now this is going to strike at the heart of what I take to be the mission of Notre Dame, and of Catholic social services, and of Catholic hospitals, Catholic high schools, which is not to kind of rally the in-group and convince each other about how sanctified we are, and to sing Kumbaya together. This is to preach to the choir, and to celebrate that we are the choir. But the purpose of these institutions is to evangelize. Of course they're outward looking. Of course they're looking to bear true and faithful witness to other people who are not Catholic. That's why we have Catholic social services, Catholic hospitals, and life institutions.
I'd like to thank the organizers for the chance to take part in this important discussion. My role will be to make several historical observations, two quite brief and one just a little bit longer. But first I need to tell you where I stand on the suit versus the mandates, as you will know where my historical observations are coming from. I do support the suit, since the mandate, in my view, makes a major mistake in limiting the definition of religious bodies to only churches and comparable worshiping institutions. Of course, other kinds of institutions can be religious, and so should be allowed, within reasonable limits, to exercise their religious freedom. But I must also say that I do not regard the mandate in apocalyptic terms. It is wrong in its abridgment of religious freedom, but the wrong is neither cataclysmic nor unprecedented. In my view, it is a wrong that can be corrected through normal democratic procedures like recourse to the courts. Now, the first brief historical observation. When I complain about my group suffering an unjust abridgment of religious freedom, my complaint will carry greater weight if my group has a strong record of defending the religious freedom of other groups, especially marginal groups. The suits that have the most credibility in this instance are those that come from individuals and institutions who have been busy defending the religious freedom of Muslims, Scientologists, peyote-smoking native religionists, and so forth. Second brief historical observation. In my view, the constitutional framework for this particular case is unusually murky. Originalism, as a judicial theory, is not going to help, since in 1787 and 1789, when the Constitution and the First Amendment were promulgated, it was impossible to imagine the interweaving of law, government activity, and personal rights that now exist. My historical judgment is that from the 1920s and 1930s, First Amendment adjudication entered a new era where the guidelines, principles, and rules have never been clarified. In the 1920s and 1930s, the reach of the federal government began to expand beyond anything that the founders could have imagined, and at the same time, the national civil rights guaranteed by the 14th Amendment were incorporated as binding on all state actions as well as national actions. The result has been pervasive judicial confusion over applying the First Amendment to the United States as it actually exists today. Therefore, adjudicating the First Amendment now requires unusual skill of assessing and applying broad legal and moral principles instead of only reference to the Constitution and a checkered record of Supreme Court decisions relating to the First Amendment. Now to the major historical observation. The genuine problem with the mandate reflects a much larger problem concerning the provision of health care in contemporary America. In my view, it is appropriate for the federal government, in keeping with the Constitution's stated purpose of promoting the general welfare, to be very concerned about the runaway cost of medical care and the catastrophes awaiting either individuals or the health care system when a substantial part of the population lacks the means to pay for health care. Answering this larger question properly would greatly reduce the conflicts over religious freedom that we now witness. The answer requires breaking the reliance of health care on insurance provided by employers and providing some kind of general health care system for the entire nation. That system might be universal insurance like Germany provides. It might be a single-payer system like Canada provides. But either way, universal insurance or single-payer, the provision of health care and the protection of religious freedom would be much more clearly separated than they are under our current system. Under either a universal insurance or a single-payer system, the government would collect taxes from all and would make at least a minimal level of health care available to all. Under either system, it would be left to individuals whether they avail themselves of contraceptive services. The legal conflict facing us today would be moot. So now an objection. But under the scheme I just outlined, surely all citizens would then be paying for other citizens to take actions to which their religious convictions might object. And that is true, but it is a smaller problem than the one we currently face. And now let me respond to my objection. Catholics and some Protestants like myself have long argued that parents should have the right to use tax-collected funding for the schools of their choice. The argument here is if freedom of religion means anything, it means the right of parents not to be forced to pay twice for educating their children in a religious school of their own choice. To me, that's a very sound argument. But the same argument should apply to a universal, nationally funded health system. If my general taxes support a school that teaches principles opposed to my religion, that is a relatively small burden if I am allowed to send my children to a school where the principles of my religion are taught. Likewise, if my general taxes support health care decisions that I think are religiously objectionable, yet if I am free to follow my religious conscience in my health care decisions, then it would also be a relatively small burden. Thus, in my view, the deeper crisis highlighted by current litigation of the mandate is the failure of this constitutional republic to promote the general medical welfare of its citizens by refusing to enact some kind of general tax-supported system of universal health care. If that were done, of course there would still be problems concerning the protection of religious liberty, but those problems would be much less than they are now.
Rather than open it up for the panelists to comment on each other's comments, I think it might be nice if we open it up to the floor for questions. Just 3 requests here. 1, please ask a question. Do it quickly in a short amount of time. Secondly, we're a large room, and so if you could stand up and say who you are, and if you're a visitor, where you might be visiting from, or if you're a student, what year you might be. And then the third request, we'd like to start with undergraduate students first at the Constitutional Studies program. So if any undergraduates have a question, I would like to start our conversation. Okay, let's open it up more generally. Please, way in the back.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm a graduate student here. I actually have a few questions. Number one, though, I would just like to comment on the part about abortifacient drugs, because I think the science is pretty clear that all of the emergency contraceptives that are covered, including ALA, act primarily as contraceptives. There hasn't been a single study to date that has showed that ALA is actually an abortifacient drug. And those are the same emergency contraceptives policies on coverage for erectile dysfunction medications? And if so, why you're okay with the disparity between the way the university addresses that versus oral contraceptives?
Okay, hopefully we're not asking you to admit anything here, but
I had 8 children.
perhaps another question? Please, sir.
A comment and then a question. Mary Rose pointed out.
Tell us who you are.
Oh, Rich Williams. I'm afraid to do this, but Rich Williams, sociology. You'll see why I'm afraid in a moment. But, Mary Rose pointed out that many, perhaps most Catholics, do not think contraception is evil at the risk of getting stripped. And by lightning, I'm going to say that the ban on contraception is evil, in my opinion. Pope Paul VI went against, had several advisory committees. He went against their recommendation. I think it's one of the worst mistakes that the Catholic Church has made in my lifetime, if not the worst mistake. Why do I think that? Well, for example, there was a study out of Johns Hopkins just a few weeks ago that said that up to a third of all maternal deaths in the developing world are due to unwanted pregnancies. The Catholic Church has adopted, or at least individual Catholic priests have adopted, what I think is an absurd position that you cannot use condoms in Africa to prevent the spread of AIDS.
How about a question? Let's get a question.
Okay, okay. I guess I will say, for those who defend, well, what several of you have done is you've defended Notre Dame's right to defend this belief. Can you defend the belief at Sept? In light of people dying, in light of all the harm that I'm alleging, at least, that's been caused by the ban of contraception, can you defend the belief itself? If it weren't the belief already, would you say that we should do it?
Anyone want to take that one?
Well, I'm going to decline the invitation to refight the battle of Humani Vitae, but actually it has nothing whatsoever to do with the lawsuit, right? I mean, religious liberty, as far as I understand it in our country, doesn't require claimants, whether they're individuals, informal associations, that are just groups of like-minded people, corporations, or big charities like Notre Dame, or at least not-for-profit institutions like Notre Dame, to somehow prove that what they hold is true. In fact, the law is quite the contrary, and it seems to me that in this respect the law is quite right. But the law basically doesn't try to say, you may believe firmly from your head to your toes that you cannot comply with this or that legal regulation, whether it's a conscription law, such as I experienced when I was a young man, whether a law that bans the use of drugs or a law that requires the use of drugs, if you're a Christian Scientist or Jehovah's Witness. The law doesn't say to anyone, you need to somehow prove that this moral impossibility you're experiencing, and sincerely assert, is somehow valid or sound or right. And I teach religious liberty cases to my students every year or two, depending on which courses I'm teaching, and we have a little bit of sport with the plaintiffs in these cases who assert, frankly, the craziest things as, in their view of the world, being required of his or her or their God. So I don't see any reason why Notre Dame or me or Philip should somehow prove that Paul was right, Paul VI, or that the minority report was superior by some set of canons of sound reasoning to the majority report for the Humani Vitae Commission. I just see that that's irrelevant.
It may be irrelevant to the case, but it's not irrelevant to all the people on the university campus who are in fact affected by the policy that the university is seeking to continue against their conscience.
Maybe I can push that question a little bit, because we clearly have a debate here at Notre Dame, and clearly a debate in the Catholic Church about the moral status of contraception, or even what is included in contraception. Any thoughts by the panelists? I mean, given the debate, who ought to decide that question for Notre Dame?
Well,
If we disagree about these things, any thoughts on that?
Well, let's push back a little bit. Who's this we?
Why don't you get-
Who's this we Notre Dame we're talking about? The last time I looked, people, as Mary Rose said earlier, people can use their paychecks and go out and buy contraceptives for their whole neighborhood if they want to. And these are people who work at Notre Dame. So who is this we we're talking about? Deciding for all of Notre Dame.
Any other?
Deciding that it can't be used with this part, it can be used with this part of your pay package, but not with this part, means a considerable amount to the people at the bottom of the pay scale. Because contraceptives vary a lot and work better for some people than others. Some of them are very cheap. And some of them are, in the long run, cheap, but have a very substantial beginning payout that the people who make the least money find very difficult to provide. So I do think that it affects people in the real ways that they live. I also think that given that this is an issue that is being addressed on the public without any internal communal consultation, panels like this shouldn't look like this. We should be having panels that include maybe, certainly at least one married woman who is in fact a user of, or has been a user of contraceptives. And better still, given that there's a series of these talks, a panel of 4 who have. I don't qualify, Ann doesn't qualify.
I appreciate the comment. It is a bit hard to ask that question at the panelists. Let's see. Let's get any students? Please. Way in the back, yeah.
I'm Christy. I'm a graduate student, and I actually have 2 questions. One for the third speaker that I'd like to pose to you first. I could have completely misunderstood what you were saying, but it seemed to me as you were saying Catholic hospitals and Catholic educational institutes, their promotion is to promote Catholicism. However, I did not choose Notre Dame to come to grad school based on the fact that it was Catholic. I chose it for the education purposes. Just as if I were to go to a hospital, I wouldn't ask someone to pray for me first if I got shot in the leg. I'd like them to be a doctor and address my leg. So is there a discrepancy there? Because you don't have to, I would feel like if it was Catholicism was the purpose of Notre Dame, then there would be a box on the application. Are you Catholic or are you not? And if you're not Catholic, sorry, you're not included. How can you promote the mission of Catholicism to a community who isn't inherently Catholic?
Okay, I think Professor Bradley, I think you spoke.
Yeah.
Professor Bradley?
Well, I don't think there's a difficulty with regard to the last thing. I mean, in other words, evangelization is typically directed to people who aren't Catholic. And the deeper meaning of when I say that Notre Dame and other Catholic institutions are to evangelize, is to bear witness to the truths of Catholicism, to bear witness to the kingdom, is basically this. Healthcare, education, social services, counseling, these are all very, very good things. And individual Catholics and groups of Catholics have, could, and should still organize to provide these things to people, and that's just great. But the question to which my earlier comments were an answer is, why would the church, acting as the Catholic Church, constitute institutions of their own, you might say, which would deliver these services? The church can be the church, has been the church, in the past and in many societies now, without institutions of these sorts. And these sorts of institutions continue without the church being present in societies where there's no detectable Catholic presence. So again, the question is, why would there be, what's the reason for having a Catholic university, or a Catholic hospital, or a Catholic charities? It seems to me that reason why there should be Catholic hospitals has to do in some way, and we might disagree or negotiate exactly which way, but it seems to me it has to be something about Catholicism. And I think that the answer is supplied by Dorothy Day, Peter Muir, and her great collaborator in the Catholic worker movement, better than anybody else, but it's a common refrain through the ages of Catholic charities and social services, including healthcare, which is that, well, I want to bring the face of Christ to the people with whom I deal. And now Dorothy Day speaking, I can see the face of Christ in the people I'm treating. And that was surely what Mother Teresa thought and said. And I don't think very many of our patients, perhaps none, those who were dying in her hands, really, her arms, were Catholic. But it seems to me that's why one would want to have a distinctly Catholic hospice or social service.
I know you have another question, but I have other hands up, so I want to get through everyone, and if we have time, we'll let you get another one. Please, sir.
My name is Chris Damien. I'm an undergrad, and I did choose Notre Dame because it was Catholic. My question is, I think that the reception distinction is a very important one, especially in today's discussion. I was wondering, how do you look at the question of reception in relation to church history and history of discussions on these issues? Because it is fairly obvious that there are a majority, probably of Catholics, who support birth control, but this isn't something that's been a part of our history as a Catholic or as a church. So in considering this reception, how do we look at history of the church that didn't support contraception? And in addition, how do we look into the history of the Catholic Church where the majority of believers believe things that are now considered heresies? Does this make the church an institution of oppression for its members? How do we look at that?
Well,
Keep the question as you
actually, okay, so I'm hearing two questions here. One is, let me see, actually, I'm not sure I've gotten this right, but one is, how does reception work in regard to this particular issue, the issue of birth control? Why is it, why does it matter that it's been so massively rejected by the faithful? Is that one of them?
In today's context, but in the past that wasn't the case.
Well, in the past, it didn't. There really wasn't a settled teaching on this because there wasn't the kind of birth control that is available now.
Well, it was something that was discussed in the early church because there were some methods of birth control.
They're very limited, and some of them must have been effective some of the time. But we're talking about not a major distinction between magic here and these things. And so on the whole, what you have in the early church, and this is something I actually do know about, is prohibitions of pharmakia, of drugs would be one, or magic, or whatever, that we read as prohibitions of birth control, sometimes rightly. Sometimes it's a little hard to tell, but so that in terms of talking about what would be functioning today, that really is only possible since the I would say about the 20s of the 19th century, of the 20th century. Okay, so it has a relatively short record, and that's something that I was pointing out, in that the state of Connecticut didn't allow married couples to purchase contraception when I was a freshman in college. Okay, so that was when it was resolved nationally by Griswold versus Connecticut. The other question, the question about was the church oppressive to those who didn't believe? Absolutely. What were the various positions over? I don't know if you want. I would say murderous would be a better word than oppressive. That you have centuries of executing heretics, including people we now label heretics as executing people we now label as Orthodox. So like the record of heretic content, this is really not about heresy, though. This is disagreement over discipline. I've been using doctrine, but the technical, at least in the early period, there's a technical distinction between doctrine and discipline. Okay, but yeah, there's a really bad record in terms of heresy, but I'm not sure that's relevant to this situation.
Okay, let's get some more. Let's get some more questions. Joe, did you have a question? Raise your hand.
Joseph Ann Astell from the Arts and Letters Dean's Office. And I know that the subject today is the lawsuit, but I would like to invite the panel to consider this as a public health issue. The mandate was pursued by the administration as a result of advice given to it by the Institute of Medicine, which is a purely medical panel. And I think that we can, there are certain other examples of public health issues where everyone agrees that, or at least most people would agree, and I think most Catholics would agree, that the public health aspect of it is so important that the religious liberty side takes a back seat. I'm thinking in terms, for instance, of childhood immunizations. It strikes me that an important point that needs to be made against the mandate is a medical one. And that we acknowledge that there are these cases of public health importance, and that this isn't one.
Anyone want to comment on it as a public health issue?
Hi, my name is Mark Noll, and I'm a graduate student. And I have a question for Professor Noll, because you don't seem to be getting very much airtime here. You made a brief but and kind of intriguing comment that those lawsuits would be taken more seriously, would bear more weight if the litigants or had a history of protecting religious liberty for others. And I was wondering, and I couldn't tell if you were saying Notre Dame did have such a history, or the Catholic Church in America does have such a history, or is regarded as that, or did not, and therefore should be. I'm hoping we do, and the Catholic Church does, and is perceived as such, but I don't know. Sorry, I was wondering.
Well, you asked me about the longer version of this talk that was radically shortened when we got the email from Philip that the trap door would open if you exceeded 7 minutes. I was actually thinking more about the evangelical Protestants that have joined the Catholic lawsuits because of the not real good history in the United States of some of the Protestant groups that have joined the lawsuits being in general in favor for religious liberty for Catholics. I'm a Protestant, so I don't have a dog in a lot of your Catholic fights, but I do know that for Catholic history, it's a lot easier after the Second Vatican Council and Dignitate Humanae to record a record of broad and widespread and effective general Catholic advocacy for general religious freedom.
Hi, I'm Zach Harris. I'm with the Gerry Bradley. I just had a question. When people brought up kind of the morality of contraception and stuff like that, and the Catholic Church's imposition, I guess. And I think that's something that's kind of getting lost in this is the fact that the Church does offer some alternatives to artificial contraception, such as natural family planning, the creating method, which studies have shown is more effective than most contraceptives in preventing pregnancy, also in taking care of some medical issues like PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. So I was just wondering if y'all could comment on that, whether if anything for those services is provided for in this mandate, and kind of where that stands within all this.
I actually don't know if it's provided for it. Gerry say no. But that was a point that I wanted to bring up also with, in conversation with Mary Rose, that if you look at the end of Humanae Vitae, right, that document closes with a call from Paul VI to scientists, right, to develop, to do research in the area, so that it's possible, to have responsible family planning that is consistent with the Church's understanding of the sanctity of marriage and of human life. And so if you look at what has happened since, was it in the 60s when that legal document was promulgated, you have, or issues.
68,
You really to have a tremendous development, and more than one method of natural family planning that is not only very effective, but is also good for marriages and families more stable, healthy, right? And there's counter evidence that shows that the use of chemical contraceptives has had a range of detrimental effects on women's health. And I don't really see that that was taken into account by this the federal medical board that decided that this would be a good thing, carte blanche for American women to have the access. So it's more complicated than that, and I know we've been kind of avoiding, except for Mary Rose, sort of weighing in on the issue of the morality of contraceptive use, but I want to call us back to what Father Jenkins said in his letter. He said very clearly, this is, the University of Notre Dame recognizes that Catholics on its staff, among its students, sometimes make the decision in conscience to use contraceptives, and that this whole battle is not about that, all right? In the end, it's about whether the University of Notre Dame as a Catholic university can fulfill its Catholic mission in keeping with official church teaching. Right? Imagine the scandal. If a Catholic university cannot stand on the basis of what is official church teaching, then what is Catholic?
Anyone else with a comment?
I do know a little bit about the natural family planning issues, and that they certainly have changed since 1968. But I'd have to say that my suspicion is that all studies that use this do not randomly select candidates.
One of the largest studies was done by the DuPont Institute, which is from Planned Parenthood. So
Yeah.
they were very clear in saying that people who use natural family planning have a much higher, or have a higher percentage of the
Right, but like all other methods, it works for those for whom it works. And one of the things, it may contribute to family stability, but it also requires a high degree of stability to begin with. And so once you're in that situation of reasonably healthy people, you have regular periods, you have a stable family life, it can be extremely effective if you put the time and energy into it, and you have that time and energy to put into it. And in fact, when I was living in Philadelphia, the Pittsburgh Family Planning, Natural Family Planning Center got an award from Planned Parenthood and was frequently referred people to the Natural Family Planning Center, although a lot of them were being referred here to get pregnant. However, before the end, before I left, as a matter of fact, the bishop, on the grounds of that award, closed the family, and his name was Bevilacqua, closed the Family Planning Center down on his way to the Archdiocese of Philadelphia.
My name is John Snyder. I'm a guest and I'm an alumnus of this university. I'd like to go back to the prior question the gentleman asked about non-Catholic participation. There are other plaintiffs in this lawsuit and other unrelated lawsuits on the same subject that are not Catholic institutions. Wheaton College is one in particular that was mentioned. One that the professor mentioned right at the end, Hobby Lobby, that was just filed 2 weeks ago, is a private company, not a Catholic family. To the gentleman's question about non-Catholic plaintiffs or non-Catholic arguments, Muslim, Jewish, evangelical, one of the primary law firms that are suing these is the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty, which is it's a public law firm that only takes religious liberty cases, and they have a 19-year history of taking cases on behalf of plaintiffs that are in fact Jewish organizations, Muslim organizations, evangelical, atheist, Catholic, And they have prosecuted these cases on behalf of 2 private companies, the one in Denver, the Hobby Lobby, and Wheaton College, and other non-Catholic institutions. So this is not a Catholic issue. It's not a non-Catholic issue. It's not a contraception issue. Their point of view is this is an issue of this country was founded on the principles of religious freedom and the freedom of practicing under whatever our individual or collective beliefs are, and that you, the government, should not be able to tell us to do something that violates those beliefs, whatever the beliefs are. In this case, it happens to be contraception, maybe one of the vehicles. But to answer that gentleman's question, Beckett has prosecuted many of these for other religious organizations.
Please, sir. Yeah, I think that was an excellent comment. Tell us who you are. I'm Mike McCarthy. I graduated Notre Dame. I'm also a lawyer. The excellent comment, and I think it gets the nub of it. Maybe we could all focus our thoughts on us changing the premises. Is saying, okay, change the premise from the Catholic Church teaches that contraception is immoral to contraception is moral. That's now the premise, and that's what the Catholic Church teaches. And let's assume that FDA-approved methods do not include anything in relation to abortion. With those 2 premises, is there still not a place for this lawsuit, to the gentleman's point, to protect religious liberty, to protect the government from saying to the Catholic Church what it must do under penalty, subject to penalty, that could be against what the Catholic Church agrees that it is its moral teaching. So regardless of what the teaching is, and so let's take contraception out of it. It is now moral. And let's take abortion out of it because the FDA-approved methods under the law do not include abortion. But then the question is, should the university still be pursuing the lawsuit with those 2 premises? I'd be interested in Professor Bradley.
Gerry, you want to miss?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fine thought experiment, but the part about stipulating that contraception is moral, I'm not sure if you mean moral in the viewpoint of many, many people, but not in the view of the Catholic Church.
In the view of the Catholic Church, the powers to be reconvened and reconsidered and now believe that contraception is moral.
Well, then you wouldn't have this lawsuit because of your other stipulation. That is, we're stipulating away the possibility that it goes beyond contraception, which is a moral evil, to a grave injustice, namely abortion. I mean, that part of the lawsuit doesn't get the play it should get, and that actually goes beyond a kind of conscience protection. It's really a matter of being made to be an accomplice in injustice. But if you stipulate those 2 things away, I think this lawsuit goes away. I don't really see how Notre Dame could claim it's on the horns of a moral dilemma, being forced to participate in something that's immoral or give up health care benefits, which itself would be immoral as Mother Jenkins and others see it. But in that thought experiment, it wouldn't follow that no one would have a lawsuit. I mean, there may be a few other smaller religions or sects, or in principle, according to church-state jurisprudence, as I understand it, a single person, an employer, who says, I'm subject to the mandate, and I personally think that my God is telling me that contraception is wrong, and you shouldn't be able to make me comply with your law. So again, in the general picture of religious liberty jurisprudence, you don't need to have a big church or a majority or actually a group of more than one to be a religious liberty plaintiff. So in this thought experiment, Notre Dame wouldn't be suing, but somebody else might be. And then much of the rest of what we said, not the debate about Humani Vitae, obviously, but much of the rest of the debate would go on as we've had it. Well, what about that? What about the public health benefits, so-called, et cetera? But that part of it would be in place. And as I was saying earlier, and that would still be worth talking about because even the single plaintiff, whether it's one Air Force major who wants to wear the skull cap, the yarmulke, or it's one Jehovah's Witness family who doesn't want to have their kid transfused, I mean, that can be a very important thing for religious liberty. You know, during World War II, there was a case brought by some, poor family in West Virginia where there were Jehovah's Witnesses and their kid was being made to recite the Pledge of Allegiance in a school. And the Supreme Court said you can't make a kid profess that kind of allegiance, and that's a great victory for freedom of religion. But it was just this one kid. So that common good, you might say, religious liberty, can be at stake mightily even with the smallest issue and the smallest number of plaintiffs.
I'm Kevin Vance, grad student here. I was wondering, I had a question for the people supporting the lawsuit. It seems, on the one hand, I understand that we could sort of think of this as a kind of emergency situation where this will start coming into effect really soon, but what do you think about the danger of our focus? I guess I'm worried that there's a danger of focusing so much on the religious liberty aspect of this that we begin to treat the immorality of contraception like some kind of irrational personal belief that we can't explain to anyone. And you know, like even engaging in sort of counterfactual like that, to me seems like we're, you know, well, what if the sky is red, or what if God is capricious, or something like that. That I don't think that, I don't know, it seems like squaring a circle or something like that we shouldn't have to engage in. Okay, so what level do we need to engage on the moral argument on its own terms? Or what point?
I was quoting from the Catholic Catechism, which means the universal catechism of the Catholic Church. Right? So it's, and so there's the debates, the probing of the question of life, you know, the new technologies, that goes on in theological circles, right? I mean, the work is going on. So that, and the work of Catholic scientists and physicians, you know, they're all working, you know, to try to find better and fuller ways for Catholics, for Christians, for people, you know, to respond to the sacredness of human life and the flourishing of human life. So, you know, I don't think, you know, that is not something that is just not happening, but this is a particular question of a particular executive decision to enforce a law in a certain way, right? We're not even talking about the Affordable Health Care law. We're talking about how a certain clause of it has been judged necessary to be enforced, right? And so that is what has prompted this.
We're running out of time. I'm going to pose one question of my own to the panelists. You get a promotion, and you're now president of Notre Dame. Obama wins the election, and he does not give a larger accommodation. August 2013, Notre Dame will have to start paying a $10 million a year penalty. In fact, it will go up. Current penalty, if the law doesn't change and Notre Dame does not comply, with the $10 million. What do? Do you change your health care policy? Do you comply with the law? Do you pay the penalty? Do you just auction off all our assets?
I would certainly comply with the law, but I would prefer to do that anyway. That I think that that's the best service to the Notre Dame community and to the but especially to the women. And I'd like to point out that Notre Dame really requires family planning of women who want to get tenure.
Gerry?
Well, I have no intention of taking holy orders, so purely hypothetically. Well, I think the only alternative to not complying, which I think is probably the only prudent alternative, there is an alternative. There's one strict condition under which my own judgment is Notre Dame could comply with the mandate. And that's a very strict condition, which is hard to imagine the university would meet. But the condition is that complying, there's a legal compulsion doing what would otherwise be a kind of wrongful material cooperation. The Notre Dame would be under a very strict moral obligation to dispel the scandal, the moral scandal that compliance would create, and to take certain steps to be sure to be bearing true and faithful witness to the truth that contraception and abortion are evils. that would require Notre Dame to not only take the position, which it has taken, that this is contrary to the church teaching, but it would have to do so in a much more conspicuous way than to date it has. It would also have to do something further. It would have to make even more clear than it has. And not only is that a matter of what the reigning rules of our club are, that if you're on the Catholic team, this is what you're buying into. Notre Dame would have to make it quite clear, conspicuously so, that these are genuine, that is true moral wrongs. And I think that's the only thing they could do. And if they did that strenuously enough, it's possible that they could dispel the scandal and obscuring of the witness that they're otherwise morally required to maintain.
Ann or Mark?
All right, I'll give it a go. I would not comply. I would take the penalties, and I would hope that it would be such a scandal that it would raise the issue everywhere, that there would be a change in the public sensibility to see a great university like the University of Notre Dame suffering like this. And it would be such a proud witness, you know, that out of the seed of that martyrdom, something great would happen.
I do the same thing, although I wouldn't use that language because Notre Dame's got a lot of money. And, it would be a grievous blow against the institution, but it would also be a testimony to its convictions.
Maybe as a footnote, we can point out that BC and St. Louis University and the California universities all comply.
Okay, well,
And all the Catholic hospitals.
a few things in conclusion, especially for the undergraduates. If you find these topics interesting, I hope you'll investigate our constitutional studies minor. If you find these topics interesting and want to know about what we're doing here, you can like us on Facebook or find us on the internet. We have sheets on the constitutional studies minor as well, and you'll see our website on that sheet. And last, and certainly not least, it's really my pleasure to welcome the Tensiani family. Thank you for all that you've done for us here in Notre Dame. Thank you, too, to our panelists. And one final request. We want to be easy on the dining hall staff. So if you could bring your rubbish and your trays back to the dining, dispose of that. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming.